Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And today we have with us Kyla Pearce. She's PhD, MPH, E-RYT 200, CBIS, and she serves as the Senior Director of Programs at the LoveYourBrain Foundation, overseeing the design, implementation, and evaluation of yoga and mindfulness programming for the traumatic brain injury community across the US, Canada, and online. Kyla blended her expertise as a yoga teacher and researcher to develop the evidence-based 6-week Love Your Brain yoga program for people with traumatic brain injury and their caregivers. This program integrates guided meditation, breathing exercises, gentle yoga, and psychoeducation to build skills in resilience and community integration. Since 2015, she has trained over 2,000 yoga teachers, that's a lot of yoga teachers, and clinicians to deliver this program through 60 yoga studios and 18 neuro-rehabilitation facilities across the US and Canada. She recently completed an NIH postdoctoral research fellowship at Dartmouth, investigating the scalability and effectiveness of yoga and mindfulness for improving quality of life, resilience, and functional outcomes among people with neurological conditions. And I'm really excited to talk about that because the N of one, we all know that we are each an N of one, meaning we are our own experiment throughout our life, but really figuring out how to scale this and get these interventions to more people is so critical. Kyla loves yoga, hiking, making ice cream, and spending time with her husband, Adam, and their sons, Bear and Owen. Find out more about the Love Your Brain program at www.loveyourbrain.com. Kyla, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Jillian, for such a warm welcome. I'm really happy to be here.
Yay. Good. All right. So we're going to get into the program itself, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and kind of how you came to this work.
Well, it's definitely been a circuitous path. I actually started my professional career in women's reproductive health and kind of left college with the dream of pursuing either nurse midwifery or becoming an OBGYN and working to advance women's reproductive health, both domestically and internationally. And kind of lived somewhat of a parallel life pursuing reproductive health through first an MPH at Dartmouth. And that's actually at the same time when my brother-in-law, Kevin Pearce, suffered a very serious traumatic brain injury in a training accident right before the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. So he was a professional snowboarder pursuing and was an Olympic hopeful at that time, and very much threw our whole family in quite a tailspin. So at that time, I, now husband, then boyfriend, Adam Pearce, decided to stop his life and really dedicate himself to supporting Kevin in his rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. So Kevin at that point was in acute care at the University of Utah. Then he transitioned to Craig Hospital and did about a year of rehab there. So at that point, I decided to, our family, one of the biggest learnings at that point was in Kevin's rehabilitation process, he received really terrific medical care. So he was very lucky to receive some of the best rehabilitation services, speech, OT, PT, but felt quite a lack of support in integrating back into his community. Mm-hmm. So my kind of pivot into the traumatic brain injury world occurred when Kevin and Adam decided to found the Love Your Brain Foundation as an organization committed to supporting the people impacted by traumatic brain injury to access programs to support community integration. Yeah. And at the time, in pursuing my MPH, was also interested in examining how yoga supports healing from traumatic brain injury. Mm-hmm. So started a research study that ended up developing the kind of formative curriculum for the Love Your Brain yoga program. And in the early days of Love Your Brain becoming an organization and really looking at what are the ways we can make a meaningful impact, found that for Kevin and Adam and myself, yoga was such a powerful healing modality. Mm-hmm. So decided to do on the side a research study that became the bedrock of our curriculum. And I can talk more about that later, but ended up getting into the traumatic brain injury world through the personal ties with Kevin and Adam and our family's experience, but then very much seeing for myself through research about the potential for yoga to be perceived and valued as an effective rehabilitation process for people healing from traumatic brain injury. So spent my kind of next 5 years pursuing my doctorate and and just completing my postdoc, right, at Dartmouth. You shared a little bit about in examining further the effectiveness, feasibility, and acceptability of yoga-based interventions for people with different severity levels of traumatic brain injury and other neurological conditions. So I didn't expect that I would be here, but it's been really meaningful. I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm very passionate about this, the mission of our organization and yoga as a healing modality.
Fantastic. So can you talk, what is it about yoga that's helpful?
It's a great question, and one that we could spend lots of time talking through. I think the one kind of big picture, one thing that I often share in talking, I know some of the people who listen to your podcast are clinicians, is often the Western understanding of the biopsychosocial spiritual model can very much be mapped onto the Panchakosha model. So that's a model in yoga philosophy that talks about 5 different layers of one's being or identity. And in the Panchakosha model, there's different ways in which yoga maps onto the Western perception of physical health, emotional health, psychological health, spiritual health. So the kind of short answer is, because yoga is holistic, it's integrative, it can really meet somebody with traumatic brain injury where they're at, because traumatic brain injury affects people in different ways, but also in shared ways in terms of it being a chronic condition that affects people physically, behaviorally, emotionally, cognitively, socially. Yoga really has the potential to be dynamic and holistic, and also be self-empowering. So people are invited to really notice and turn their attention inward instead of working on trying to meet certain benchmarks that are sometimes helpful from a Western model of, this is for your symptom improvement, you need to get from X to Z. But that can sometimes be disempowering and ultimately frustrating for folks.
And so how did Kevin, or how did your family find yoga?
Well, Kevin found yoga in his healing process about, I'd say, 3 years after his injury. And there's a kind of funny story where he was actually dating someone who was pursuing her yoga teacher training and kind of fell into it that way. And I vividly remember him sharing how yoga was an entry point into feeling able, connected, calm, in a way that no other area of his life offered him. And I think coming to yoga as a professional athlete, I think he was for a while really looking for that kind of feeling of flow that he got as a snowboarder, and his yoga practice where no one was telling him what to do. He could kind of titrate the amount of challenge versus relaxation that met him where he was that day. It added that blend of physical challenge, but also emotional release and social connection to practice in a space with other people showing up just as they are. So he really got hooked at that point in his healing journey. And then at that time, actually, Adam, who, as I shared earlier, had spent about a year as Kevin's really primary caregiver offering support in his rehabilitation, he got to a point where he realized that he needed to step back and get some space from the relationship that he had developed with Kevin. So he actually visited me at the time. I was doing a fellowship in India, in northeastern India, and he did a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, which is a very rigorous silent meditation practice. You wake up basically at 4:30 a.m., meditate until 10 o'clock at night. And for him, it was a real wake-up call to how he was relating to his experience as a caregiver. Adam became passionate about and deeply interested in the practice of Vipassana meditation. And then at the same time, I had just completed my yoga teacher training and was also doing some Vipassana meditation and felt connected to the physical practice of yoga, but then also the breath work and meditation components, and that kind of synchronicity of all of us finding contemplative practices at the same time was really the catalyst for the organization, LoveYourBrain Foundation, deciding to have our yoga program be our flagship program.
There's a number of components I just want to kind of touch back upon in your story thus far. It's really fascinating. So first of all, what we have is people coming to yoga from very different perspectives. Like you were just interested in it and it spoke to you and you were interested. Kevin came to it out of a very traumatic experience, both physically, mentally, emotionally. And so it was, in some ways, he was able to come back home to himself. And I'll just say that in preparation for this show, you had sent me Crash Reel, which is a movie that was made about his story. And so watching him, before as an Olympic hopeful, as kind of how we think of typical snowboarders. And there's a lot in there about old family movies and him watching Kevin just throw himself at the mountains, at the snow, at the flips and the spins and the turns. And there's a way that your body, there's a joy that you can see in people flinging their body into space and being able to have it settle in a disciplined way down onto a course as you anticipate. So there's a way that there's such a freedom, a liberation, and a joy. And really what's happening in that moment is the union of this, the spirit, the breath, and the body. And that is the definition of yoga, right? Yoga, the word yoga is to yoke or to connect, to unite. So you're uniting all the elements of a person's existence. And you can see that in his joy in snowboarding. But there was also I don't want to say he necessarily took it for granted, but there was a way that there was a freedom. He didn't have to think, oh, thank God. He didn't have to have gratefulness for that experience because he had never not had it. And that after his injury, you could really see that there was a confusion on his part about where does he find that again? And even as he gets better and is able, I remember in the movie at one point, there's a section where he's back with his buddy and he's got a good solid group of buddies. So it's not like he was a lone snowboarder, just aiming for the top. He did this out of joy, with pals all the time. It was him and pals all the time. And there's a point where they're trying to, I don't know what the name for, I think of it in skateboarding as an ollie, where you kind of just jump the board and they're trying to jump over essentially like a pole, and that his pals can do it, but that he can't quite get his body. He can't quite unite his body and his mind to do the action, which is clearly something he would have excelled at in the past. And there's this, you can see that there's kind of this level of discomfort from him about why won't his body do this thing. And even some from his pals, like how to support him and love him and go, yeah, dude, you're just not doing it. But I can see how yoga would help reunite those aspects of himself. And then talking about Adam, his brother, your husband, talking about him coming to yoga as a way of, the experience was traumatic for him in a different way, right? Clearly his body wasn't affected by Kevin's injury, but that what he did with his body for the next year in terms of caretaking for his brother and what his spirit and his mind were focused on needed a revolution. So we find liberation from old trauma, liberation from new trauma, interest, curiosity, that all of you came to yoga in these different directions, but that everybody found what they needed in yoga.
So well said. Exactly.
Okay. So any last thoughts about kind of that piece?
My only other thought is I just appreciate how you summarize that, because I think one thing we do often get organizationally is questions around why do yoga, and especially the cultural perception that yoga is only for people with a certain body type, a certain ability level, a certain level of economic resourcing. So just the conversation that we're having around the different entry points into yoga being about coming home to yourself. So either having a calming practice that can support you to manage stress, or can help rebuild mobility if you're looking for something more physically activating, something purely about community building. There's just so many ways that yoga can support people. And I just really hope that people listening to this, if you have never done yoga before, take away this idea that yoga has something for everyone. And hopefully there's a curiosity to then try.
I absolutely agree. I think yoga is perfect for everyone. So let's talk a little bit about the Love Your Brain program. What does it include?
So we have 3 primary programs. I'll just share a snippet about each. Mm-hmm. So our original program was actually our retreat program. So we have a retreat that is a 5-day integrative health program that is based on the pillars of mindfulness, movement, community, and nutrition. So these are immersive experiences that we offer for people affected by traumatic brain injury and caregivers in different places across the US. So we have different retreat centers that we partner with and offer these programs for free. We also have our yoga program that I mentioned a bit earlier. That's a 6-week program that we offer in partnership with yoga studios and hospitals for the traumatic brain injury community in the United States and Canada. Mm-hmm. At the peak pre-pandemic, we had about 65 yoga studio partners and about 25 hospitals or different types of facilities offer this program. But there's and I could talk a little bit more about the research later, but we have also researched the effectiveness of this program and found improvements in a variety of different outcomes. So that's really our solution for how to support people to connect in their local community. So a retreat is really about getting outside of your community, being in nature, following our curriculum to rebuild skills and resilience, then transitioning back to your home environment, continuing to practice yoga for your healing. And then we also, during the pandemic, developed the Love Your Brain Mindset online program. So this is a 6-week program also that is delivered on Zoom. People can participate either in a live yoga class with a group discussion, or if you're less interested in the yoga portion, there's also just a group discussion program to support different accessibility levels. This program, all programs are designed based on the science of resilience. So different elements of the curriculum. We use the research from Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney. They're 2 researchers from the VA that did research among people who've experienced complex trauma and found there's 10 factors that these individuals in their interviews and qualitative research with them demonstrated that showed the kind of the means to being resilient and overcoming extreme adversity. So all of our curriculum are based on those factors, but then also our mindset program does a little bit more in the growth versus fixed mindset research from Carol Dweck. So what we're hoping for individuals who come through our program is that there's a way to reframe some of the difficulties of the TBI experience to find greater meaning and purpose, and ultimately a growth mindset towards how to use challenge as a springboard for deep and connection to who you are and your potential as a human. So we now offer these programs throughout the year. All of our programs are free, and we've served just under 10,000 people since the inception of Love Your Brain through this integration of programming.
And so talk to us about resilience versus recovery.
Yes, this was a really pivotal kind of nugget of wisdom that when we were originally designing our programming, there was actually a nurse practitioner from Dartmouth who came to one of our retreats and gave a lecture on what resilience is and the difference between resilience and recovery. And so in short, recovery implies an attempt to return to where you were originally. So to return to original functioning, which in certainly some medical conditions makes complete sense. If you break your bone, there's an expectation that you put on a cast and then your bone heals completely, you return to original functioning. With TBI, as we know, it's often chronic. There's often ongoing symptoms and impacts of the injury that the opportunity is then to learn how to manage. So we feel organizationally that resilience is a much more accurate and also empowering way to frame the TBI experience, because if someone's coming in with the understanding that they're trying to get back to who they were before, that may not be possible and can create a lot of frustration, a lot of and a lot of suffering, not only for the person with the injury themselves, but also for their family members and people supporting them. So we talk about resilience organizationally in the TBI kind of healing process. And there's some of the factors that I was mentioning before that help promote resilience are, for instance, realistic optimism. So how to develop a mindset where you see challenges and also find a way to have a plan B, plan C to be able to work through the challenge. So that's just one of our classes in our 6-week programs. For our yoga program and our mindset program talks about realistic optimism and helps folks identify a challenge, but also see the strengths and the ways in which they're working through it.
I'm super curious about you mentioned from the VA researchers' perspective, there were 10 factors.
Yeah.
What are those factors?
So one is role models. And we can even, so specifically in our programs, the first program, we ask folks to share a bit of their story, but then also identify a superhero. So somebody in their life that is a source of inspiration. And the way the VA researchers talk about this is it's really important to have people who emulate different qualities that you want to aspire to. So having role models in your life can help you overcome adversity or develop skills and resilience, because if I see Jillian being really motivated to every day exercise, that then inspires me to do the same. So some of the other factors are physical and brain fitness. So they talk about brain-derived neurotropic factor and the research around the value of aerobic exercise. Cognitive flexibility. There's a conversation around how for all of us, and especially in traumatic brain injury, when experiencing some intense life challenge, denial can be an effective coping mechanism, but has limitations. And ultimately, how to reframe an experience to move beyond denial and see opportunities for acceptance and how to work with challenge is really important. Meaning and purpose. So finding ways to see new opportunities for learning, growth, finding meaning and purpose in adversity. Realistic optimism, as I mentioned before, how to reframe and still see challenge, but not feel that you're defined or stuck by it. Another factor is facing fears. So how to use fears as an opportunity for growth and learning instead of shutting one down. Social support. So a lot of research on the value of community, and especially in the TBI context, because it can be so isolating and invisibilizing. All of our programs are very much designed around how to build community and connect people and overcome social isolation. And then finally, having some religious or spiritual practice or connection to something bigger than you. That in their research, the individuals who showed the greatest amount of resilience demonstrated some religious or spiritual practice. And then finally, altruism. So finding ways to feel like your challenge can be a way to give back or help others, can also be a way to move through difficult times.
That is a big piece of Ayurveda. I don't think everyone practices it as such, but I have an old book I found in India when I was there in 2005 about Ayurveda. And in the beginning, it basically states like, we are here to help the turning of the universe. And so the work that we do is for that we are here to contribute with our breath, with our awareness, with our existence. It's not if we win the Olympic medal that makes us valuable, but it's our level of self-awareness that contributes to the turning of the universe. And so there are times where I was thinking about it because you mentioned it now. And yesterday, the conversation I was having with a patient in clinic who has some fairly severe autoimmune disease and quite a few life stressors on top of that right now. That was what our conversation was around. So it really has to be part of our medicine at all levels. It's great. The altruism piece. We are valuable. Even if we're not necessarily valuable in the way we were valuable before, we are still valuable. So finding that new value. So that's great. So those 10 components, that's a lot. That's a lot to think about.
A lot to think about. And also I find really energizing because what we talk about also in our programs, and also we do trainings for yoga teachers and health professionals and yoga, is just how dynamic that is. And one thing may feel more accessible in terms of, so all of us have an inherent resilient capacity. And these 10 factors are ways to cultivate, but also ways to then lean on at different points in our life. So for me right now, maybe it feels more accessible to lean on my community and social support. At other times, maybe that's less accessible. And other things like thinking about a role model, a figure in my life who I deeply care about. So I completely hear what you're saying. It's a lot. And because it's a lot, it also feels like, all right, there's always a way to touch into resilience, and it's different every day.
So you have these 3 programs, this retreat piece, this 6-week yoga in person, and then the Mindsight program. How has it been received? Can you tell us some of the stories of places where it's being offered? You mentioned in the beginning about, and I think it's very true, that in the US, we have a perception of yoga like it's a certain type of usually lady in a certain type of legging, in a certain, who has time at 10 a.m. every day because they don't work or they have resource. So what can you tell us about some of the variety of folks that have been served and where this program is being offered?
Sure. Yeah. So we started our retreat and yoga program in Vermont, where we're based. And since then have expanded. Our yoga program at its peak was in about 35 states in the US and about 5 Canadian provinces. So we had the goal of being in all 50 US states and all Canadian provinces by 2022. Didn't happen. And we've actually kind of rethought that strategy given the accessibility of our online program. But we have seen, and it was a big question around knowing that transportation can be a big issue for folks, knowing even leaving home, people can have a lot of anxiety about leaving home. Who is going to show up to our program? And we found that a couple of things that I'm quite proud of, we have pretty equal distribution of severity level. So people in their eligibility form self-report the severity of traumatic brain injury, mild, moderate, and severe. So we have just about equal proportions of individuals across different severity levels. So that feels exciting to know that our program is accessible across different severity. We do ask what proportion of people have a previous yoga practice. I find that there is a majority, about 60% of people have a previous yoga practice. However, about 40% don't. So we are reaching people who may have some misperceptions about what yoga is and are really there for the community building, and then are experiencing benefits in some of the other elements of yoga practice physically or through mental health. Yeah, we track a lot of different demographics, so I can definitely get into more of those if that's of interest. But we, at this point, have found that most of our programs need to have, so each in our in-person program, we have a class size of between 7 and 13 people. So we've found in terms of the scalability that it doesn't really work for our program to be offered in very rural communities. So our online program has been a really exciting way of meeting individuals who may not have proximity to an in-person Love Your Brain yoga program. But at this point, we're relaunching our in-person program in 5 yoga studios across the US. So in Seattle, in Boston, in Denver, in Atlanta, and Charlotte, North Carolina. And every quarter when we offer our program, we'll be adding 5 additional studios so that by the end of this year, we're hoping to be back in about 20 of our partner studios. It's been a huge learning. Each state has different COVID risk mitigation policies. So we're very much in a learning phase around what the demand and also way in which we can offer this safely looks like.
And your Mindsight program, how is that structured or offered, or how can people access that?
That program is also offered quarterly, and everyone signs up on the Love Your Brain website because our programs are free. We kind of do everything on the back end to review folks' eligibility forms and then also train the facilitators and the teachers. So our Mindset program, we have about 50 facilitators, and it's really exciting that a majority of our facilitators have the lived experience of traumatic brain injury or caregiving people with traumatic brain injury. Mm-hmm. So we've really made a big kind of focus on supporting people who can directly speak to the experience of TBI to lead our programming. Mm-hmm. So on our website, we open registration about 6 weeks before our programs are offered, and they're offered in January and April and July and October. Mm-hmm. And we run them at different points of the day to hopefully make them accessible for people across really the globe. We now have people from New Zealand, Australia, different English-speaking countries participating. So It's been really exciting to see that international contingency coming through.
And so talk to us a little bit about the brain trauma and yoga in the research. What do we know from the research?
So I was actually just looking back at some of the literature, and one study that recently was published, I'll talk a little bit about our research, but for those interested in specifically concussion and mild traumatic brain injury, Rebecca Akabchuk is a researcher at, I think, the University of Connecticut, and she published a meta-analysis of the therapeutic benefits of meditation, yoga, and different mindfulness-based interventions, and found, granted that some of the limitations of the 20 studies included in this meta-analysis were that not many were randomized controlled trials. So that's definitely a weakness in this space. Mm-hmm. But of those studies did find significant improvement in physical health, cognitive performance, quality of life, and self-related processing. And notably, the most significant improvements were in depression and fatigue. So I think the literature right now has largely been in mindfulness-based stress reduction evaluations. So these are 8-week interventions that usually are about 30 hours of contact time. So in-class time that blends different mindfulness education, including some hatha yoga, so some mindful movement. That research has shown improvements and also cognitive benefits like working memory, information processing speed, attention control, also in different physical improvements around mobility, balance, stamina, and some mental health benefits around depression and anxiety. And that is important because in traumatic brain injury, about 50% of patients with TBI develop some sort of mental health condition in their post-injury experience. So the takeaway is that the literature in yoga for TBI is still a pretty small body of research, not many randomized controlled trials, and it is growing. So in our research, we have used our program data as a way to investigate and also share the impact of our programs, and also hopefully develop greater relationships and buy-in with the medical community. So the 4 studies that we've done, one was an 8-week pre-post evaluation with 31 individuals with acquired brain injury. 15 were in a waitlist control group. 16 were in our 8-week intervention. We found significant improvement in the quality of life after brain injury scale. So this is a validated quality of life scale specifically for TBI. It has 6 different subdomains. And the most significant improvement were in positive sense of self and ability to manage negative emotions. And that was a study that I mentioned that I did in my MPH in collaboration with some researchers at Dartmouth in the early days of LoveYourBrain's development of our yoga program. And one thing that I'll mention from that study, which we found really interesting and informed our curriculum, was that we had no psychoeducation or kind of group discussion part of that intervention. And what we found is that after the study, after each class in the study, our participants really wanted to stay and talk to each other. So that's what led us to, in our yoga program curriculum, add the 20 minutes of psychoeducation and group discussion. The 3 studies after that were on our Love Your Brain yoga program curriculum. So that's the 90-minute, once a week for 6 week curriculum that blends pranayama or breathing exercises for nervous system regulation and concentration, 45 minutes of asana or gentle movement for functional mobility, 15 minutes of meditation for relaxation, and then 20 minutes of group discussion with psychoeducation. So the 3 studies that we've evaluated our yoga program, one was a qualitative study with 13 individuals with TBI and 3 caregivers, and found in our qualitative interviews, some of the key themes were that the program enhanced a sense of belonging, a sense of resilience. It was also accessible, so meaning people enjoyed participating and found that the way that the class was structured and the movements were adaptable and met their needs. And also people sustained relationships after the program. And that was really important for us, since we very much wanted this to be an entry point for community integration and ongoing connection. And finally, the 2 other studies, one is actually the largest study to my knowledge published of yoga for traumatic brain injury. So granted, this was a longitudinal study without a control group. We did have about 1,500 people who participated in our program over 2 years, 705 of whom completed pre and post evaluations and found significant improvement in the quality of life after brain injury measure. And then also a few other NIH measures through the PROMISE battery of patient-reported outcome measures that look at positive affect and well-being, resilience, and cognition. Those were all had significant benefit. And then finally, we did a study with actually the people who offer the yoga teachers who offer our programming across all of our partner studios. So there were 86 of our partner yoga teachers, and this was a survey, a cross-sectional study that surveyed these individuals to ask about best practices for delivering yoga that's adapted for people with traumatic brain injury. So some of the actual technical ways of adapting the practice, as well as the implementation side. So what made it feasible for yoga teachers to deliver this program? So to your point around the kind of scalability piece, we organizationally are interested not only in getting yoga out there, but doing it in a quality way, and also assessing how to do that so others can hopefully take those learnings and continue to make yoga more accessible for the traumatic brain injury population.
It's amazing. I mean, 1,500 to have 700 people participate in a yoga study is fantastic.
Yeah, we were very
amazing. It's really impressive.
Yeah, big team effort to make that
big team effort. Yes, absolutely. So clearly you have a really solid foundation. Like you have a really grounded foundation in the science, in the background, in the structure of the program. So turning our attention looking forward, what do you see about the potential for this to be scaled, this program to be scaled, or for this to potentially change healthcare? Like, what's the thinking there?
Well, our biggest vision was how to bridge and create a more seamless continuum of care by bridging hospitals or neuro-rehabilitation facilities with yoga studios. So when I talked a little bit about how we partner with hospitals, one of our big focuses has been how do we train clinicians in different components of the Love Your Brain Yoga 6-week program so that people with TBI are introduced earlier on in their healing process to tools like breath exercises to help with nervous system regulation, basic movement practices to help with awareness as well as mobility, and then develop some confidence in these practices so that when they transition back to their community, they have a community-based Love Your Brain Yoga program to then not only stay connected socially, but also as they progress in their healing journey, since yoga is so adaptable, it can continue to be a practice that they use to benefit different parts of their symptoms or whatever they're working on at that stage in their healing. So I think moving forward, we are committed and excited about training and collaborating with clinicians. And I recently was just reviewing and reminding myself about the term social prescribing, which is something used a lot in the UK, but how really, in addition to prescribing medicine, what we really also need to be doing is prescribing social engagement and how that is vital to healing and living up to your full potential. So working with clinicians to basically socially prescribe going to yoga classes as a way to support ongoing healing. And if there can be yoga teachers trained in accessible yoga practices for traumatic brain injury through our programs or through others, that really is what I hope is the future of healthcare, is how there can be greater connection and integration between the traditional medical system and community-based programs that use contemplative practices like yoga and meditation.
That's fantastic. It's calling to my memory about how the UK has like a ministry of loneliness, that it's...
Right. Yeah. And it's, there's no pill for community. So it really needs to be a way that we, prioritize as a culture and create pathways and remove barriers to make that possible.
I mean, the pill for loneliness essentially is, I think what we do with opiates, screens, addiction, some of that I think is the longing for connection that we can't find. They're not outlets that we want to encourage. They're not outlets that necessarily get us to a better place. They just interrupt the feelings temporarily. But then as soon as that pill, I'm doing air quotes, kind of wears off, all those same feelings are there. So yoga is a way to really get underneath all of that, both medically, socially, spiritually. It's a great intervention. And of course, it's not just for TBI. We know that. Has the Love Your Brain considered, and I'm just curious, like partnering, or have you worked with other organizations around other medical challenges besides TBI?
So our clinical affiliate program, so where we integrate our 6-week yoga program into the medical system, that is actually more inclusive of people with different forms of brain injury and can be different neurological conditions based on the patient demographic of that facility and the people who we train. We trust them and lean on their expertise to really decipher which patients would benefit most from the structure of the curriculum. So yes, in that setting. And then also did some research with a neurologist at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in adapting our program for patients with multiple sclerosis. So we did a crossover trial that the paper is still being written, but there were exciting and positive results from the adaptations of the intervention for multiple sclerosis. So yes, I think there's definitely so much opportunity. We are a small but mighty team. So if there are people looking to collaborate and take this intervention and adopt it for other populations, we're definitely always looking to support that type of collaboration. There's also a really interesting study out of the Hines VA in Illinois, I believe, led by Amy Harold, that is using a novel neuromodulation technique and integrating our Love Your Brain Yoga intervention as part of that study. So that will be something forthcoming in the next year.
Oh, fantastic. What a great program. What a grounded, organized, accessible way to approach reuniting the body, mind, and spirit in traumatic brain injury. So to access your programs, how do people access your programs? How do they find you?
Find us on our website, loveyourbrain.com. You're also welcome to reach out and email me. My email is Kyla, Kyla, at loveyourbrain.com. Always happy to answer questions. But yes, visit us on our website and we will always do our very best to respond and look forward to staying connected.
Fantastic. Before we close, anything else you want to add?
Just deep appreciation for your work. It's always so exciting to meet with neurologists and people in the kind of more traditional medical space who really understand, both from a lived experience and also in how you support your patients, the power of more integrative and holistic practices. So I'm just energized and excited to meet you, and thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for listening today with Kyla Pearce from LoveYourBrain.com. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can get more information about Kyla, as she just said, and the Love Your Brain program at LoveYourBrain.com, and more information about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. Please be sure to share the show with your friends, especially any friends who've suffered with traumatic brain injury, mild, moderate, or severe. And I just want to put the one plug in, is the show that we just posted previous to this show is with Shay Data, who is a neurologist at NYU who focuses on traumatic brain injury. And so her show we talked all about the different types of brain injuries, TBI, mild, moderate, severe, what makes an injury mild, moderate, or severe, what kind of some of the factors around determining recovery and resilience. So this is kind of a twofer. This is a whole month we're doing on brain injury here. So please share these shows with your friends, and we welcome your rating and reviews wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. And we love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we're committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Partyfish Media. Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org.